is July 5th, 2012, 9:55 p.m. Tonight, we have a lot of stuff to go over, and one of those things that I want to go over is my view on politics as of today, and what that means for me and the way I vote, the way I represent myself. And I feel that the best way to phrase what I'm going to talk about is kind of an identity realization, we'll say. Like, one of those moments where you discover something revealing about yourself, and you kind of just have to face the music that you were in denial about something originally. So, but first I want to start out with, we're going to be talking about Governor Romney for a little bit, and one of the stories I want to highlight is a story that is in the LA Times, which is where I originally read it, I think from the Washington Post, but I can't be sure. Maybe somebody can point me to that particular story. And this is from an interview that he did with CBS News, Jan Crawford, on Wednesday. And what I want to talk about, though, is I want to talk about the courts. Now, in the last 30 years, we'll say, the courts have become increasingly politicized, increasingly polarized when it comes to controversial and questionable issues that affect not just one type of people or another type of people, but affects everybody, all Americans. And one of those issues is Romney's view on the courts, which I am deeply critical of. So, in his interview with Jan Crawford, he was discussing how originally let's go back. Originally, when we were talking about justices of the Supreme Court, Romney would say that if he were to nominate justices, he would nominate justices using John Roberts, the Chief Justice, as the kind of the template in which he appoints justices, believing that John Roberts was the most amazing justice in the world. He was the best justice that the court has ever seen in a generation. And so that's how he wanted to stack the court. Now, what is the function of the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court is our final say on everything legal. Now, we would hope that, with all of the bickering in the House and Senate, all the bickering between the White House and the legislature, we would hope that the Supreme Court would kind of be that calm, where we would go there and bring our grievances or our issues, and we would believe that 9 people that are appointed and affirmed by the legislature would make good law that is mindful of conditions and circumstances, that acts in an impartial and fair way, that doesn't show bias towards one position or another position, and that they take the entire law into account when they make a decision. So, what I want to discuss is this quote from the LA Times. Now, Mr. Romney was asked who would he nominate, okay, let's try this again. When Romney was asked who he would nominate, originally he would have nominated justices similar to, Roberts, the Chief Justice, viewed as a conservative because he was appointed by George W. Bush during his administration. However, after the Chief Justice sided with what is called the liberal wing of the court, Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Sotomayor, or Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, he said that he would never have nominated justices like John Roberts, who he believed would have disagreed with the law. Now, here's what I find this offensive is a judge's best credential is how impartial can he be, how detached, how blind, really, for lack of a better word, can a justice be when it comes to determining how law is interpreted. Now, me personally, I'm kind of a purist, so when it comes to interpreting law, I like to use the system where I look at all angles of an argument. I look at the original intent of what was written, and I ask, how does it apply today? Would the framers say it this way? Would they argue it this way? How can we be fair and just in the court system? And that's how I would expect any president of either party to be. And maybe I'm just being naive about it, but it's important that, at least to me, that the executive of the executive branch behave in a manner in regards to justices that empowers all Americans of all positions and all viewpoints to ensure that we have a truly impartial court. When Crawford asked whether he would nominate a justice like Roberts, now that the Chief Justice voted to uphold the president's health care law, Romney answered that he, quote, certainly wouldn't nominate someone who I knew was going to come out with a decision that I vehemently disagreed with. And that's a quote from the interview. Roberts' decision to side with the liberals of the court, Romney added, gave the impression that his decision was not based on a constitutional foundation, but instead a political consideration about the relationship between the branches of government. Now, he is entitled to state his opinion about the ruling, certainly. I mean, sure, like 500,000 Americans or more have probably definitely done so at one point or another. But what is important to see here is that Romney is willing to stack the courts with people who agree with his viewpoints, instead of stacking the court with people whom are able to empathize with all viewpoints, and that he is so polarized on his positions and on his viewpoints that he's willing to use the courts to justify conservative values and basically dismiss any other interpretation or any other viewpoint from and this is from a fairness point of view. The court is the only branch of government that is designed to actually be fair and balanced, to coin a phrase. If we're going to believe that any entity in the government should be fair and balanced, it would be the court system. So, Mr. Romney, you are very wrong in your viewpoint on the courts, and I am appalled that you would say something like that. Moving on, in the next segment, I want to talk about Romney as the failed nominee. So stay tuned, and we'll move on next. Welcome back. And what I want to talk about is Romney as the failed nominee. Now, I'll confess, when Romney stated he was going to run for the nomination again, I was very excited. Being a moderately minded person, I believe in being fair and as impartial as possible, listening to as many viewpoints as I can. I just tended to lean on the right side of the political aisle. But what I was cheering about was that we had a moderate Republican who was willing to embrace moderate centrist values, which I believed the Republican Party needed desperately due to its increasingly polar view on the world. And what I got was a spineless and tasteless nominee who... here, let's just go through the reasons. Okay, so this is why Romney is not qualified to be president. He has forgotten his moderate roots. In Massachusetts, he is a moderate. He voted for, liberal social policy, liberal values from a social, liberal social values, liberal economic values, and he has abandoned those values because they are no longer. He can no longer reconcile those values with the National Party. The National Party will not have his moderate viewpoint on the campaign trail as a presidential nominee. So immediately he has just forsaken everything and anything moderate and is willing to embrace a very conservative agenda, which is not in the best interest of Americans. He has forgotten that it was he and other Republicans who pushed the individual mandate issue about the healthcare law. This is something that is absolutely incredible to me when I learned about this. And I want to say, just for the record, that Republicans from the 1990s literally forgot, conveniently, that they were the ones who came up with the idea in the first place as a counter-proposal to Clinton's one-payer system healthcare that he was working on in 1993 and 1994. So, no Republican is going to come up and tell me that it's unconstitutional when, in fact, it was a Republican idea in the first place. It came out of the Heritage Foundation, for crying out loud, which is a conservative think tank. It was their idea. So, people who are claiming that Obama is grabbing for power is off his rocker. Furthermore, he is not an ally of the LGBT community. Despite what he claims, I don't see it. Not in the slightest. Sure, he can nominate a judge that's a homosexual. Sure, he can have homosexual friends and they don't feel threatened by him. Okay, good for his friends. What about the rest of us? How can he call himself an ally to LGBT people when he embraces anti-marriage equality legislation? He embraces the anti-gay agenda, which is to basically make homosexuals a second-class citizen, and they are second-class citizens in the most serious way. How can he call himself an ally to gay people when he doesn't embrace them as a community or as a demographic? I don't see it. I don't believe it. And quite frankly, his words are empty to me. He does not favor, in regards to economic issues, he does not favor a more fair and reasonable tax code. He wants a lower tax code. He wants a cheaper tax code. And to accomplish that goal, he would gut government programs in the process to do it. I'm sorry, but while I do believe strongly in tax reform, because I think the system as it's written right now is horribly broken, he will not embrace a system that is equally fair to all Americans, including the wealthy. And yes, I understand the wealthy do pay a large share of taxes. There is no question, no justifiable person will say that they do not, because they most certainly do pay a lot of taxes. But what I want to see everyone paying a lower portion of taxes. I just want to see more people doing it. And this means rebuilding industrialized America, and this means rebuilding our ability to produce anything and everything. And reestablishing full employment for as many people as possible, getting our unemployment rate down below 4%, but I do not believe his policies will do it. History has proven, in recent time that these conservative ideas do not work when the responsibility isn't shared by everybody. And during George W. Bush's administration, his tax cuts did not produce any noticeable change in employment figures, and the unemployment rate was low, but it was already low when he took office. So I'm going to hard-nosedly say that he did not really affect any change in that regard. Furthermore, I don't believe in the trickle-down effect anymore. I don't believe it works. It does not work because there are people at the top who are concerned with their own welfare and their own wealth, and they will do what they can to protect that, and that means screwing the working-class American, which has been proven over and over again when we look at things like executive pay packages. We look at the profits that are taken by shareholders that are not shared with their workforce. And quite frankly, such a system is offensive. He has abandoned his moderate views to embrace an ultra-conservative, deeply confused, bipolar Republican Party. I don't know who appointed these people as the head of the party, but whoever did, you deserve to not reproduce anymore because you're a moron. I cannot believe the things I am hearing coming from the leadership of the Republican Party. It is making my skin crawl, and I am deeply offended by a lot of it. The party as a whole is just intolerant. I'm sorry. The party has just embraced an intolerant view of the LGBT community as a whole, and I can't support it anymore. It's just not in my best interest, nor is it in the best interest of other LGBT people. I don't see it. I see a few reasonably well understood Republicans coming out and supporting same-sex endeavors, and I applaud them deeply for it, because they are fighting against the grain of their own party to come out and do what is just and fair. And so, to Republicans like Maureen Walsh from Walla Walla, and Representative Glenn, who in Washington State stood up and supported marriage equality, sir and madam, I applaud you for voting with Democrats on this issue, and I applaud your informed and impassioned words as a result. I also believe that Romney is not... He does not represent the values of the executive. And here's what I mean by that. All through school, all through my political science learning career, which is most of my education so far, Romney has not demonstrated that he can be a diplomat. He cannot be a representative of the American state in other countries. Why? Because he is so embroiled in his own national identity. He is embroiled in his own view of the world, the American view of the world. He is unable to see how another nation views us. He is unable to empathize with another nation's representatives, and he is unable to represent us at a negotiating table in a manner that is constructive and reasonable. So, again, Mr. Romney, I do not believe you would fill the role of a diplomat to my satisfaction to warrant supporting you. The president is demanded to be our first diplomat to the world. He represents the United States in all things official, all things state-related, and as a result, he is also our diplomat to any foreign dignitary that sets foot on our soil. So, on that, Mr. Romney, sorry, you don't fit that particular bill. Further, he is no ally to women's rights, despite what he says. He may have signed legislation previously which maybe empowers or takes away rights of women. I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest. However, it is clear from his rhetoric he is no friend to women's rights at all. And neither is the Republican Party, and that's been proven over and over again. And most recently with Missouri and other state legislatures across the country, they do not demonstrate that they are willing to find common ground with women rights activists to come to a workable compromise that both protects women and protects the life within her. So, Mr. Romney and Republicans as a whole, sorry, your views are not compatible with my views on this issue. Furthermore, I don't believe he is any ally to working Americans, and the reason I say that is because, while yes, he will seek to give employers more money to hire more people, admirable, sure. However, what good is that? What good is that opportunity when bosses can fire you at will for no reason? What good is that when you have no bargaining power to set your wage, to ask for benefits, or anything of that sort? You don't have any. As an employee, you are at the mercy of your employer. You have no rights to do anything. So, Mr. Romney is no ally to working America in that regard. He would seek to lift regulation that's already in place to protect workers and just basically leave them powerless to do nothing but do your job or leave. There's no exceptions, no special circumstances, nothing. There's nothing to hold an employer back from arbitrarily terminating you for whatever reason they want, and that's not acceptable to me as well. The current state of the Republican Party, with its polarized leadership and its polarized figures in office, there is no bipartisanship. Nothing coming from the Republican Party at all. And I'm sorry, again, not acceptable. The Republican Party is not willing to compromise on any of their issues, and if they do, then they're viewed as weak. The party will view itself as weak and powerless. And I'm sorry, but first of all, you're in the minority. You don't have any power, and your candidate will likely not be elected. So, again, the Republican Party, I've not seen any bipartisanship. Nothing substantial, nothing at the national level, certainly. So, again, such a viewpoint is not compatible with my way of thinking. The president is absolutely opposed to taking any Democrat seriously, unless it touts the Republican Party line. That's not bipartisanship. When you're demanding Democrats basically think like Republicans and then saying we're bipartisan. No. Bipartisan means you embrace ideas from both sides of the aisle, not just your own. Sorry, not buying it. And finally, Mr. Romney, and I'll be just straight blunt with you, you are a hypocrite. You have abandoned your past because you're afraid of it. You've abandoned your accomplishments. You have abandoned your views that you held in Massachusetts in the effort to get elected. You are fake. You are a liar. And I do not approve of the way you've conducted yourself in the primary and in the general election. So I'm afraid, on that ground, you are, like what the Bible says, you are the man who looked at himself in the mirror and forgot what he looked like when he walked away. And finally, and this is the most important to me, you misunderstand how the Supreme Court works, sir. You do not have the ability to understand how the Supreme Court works. You're thinking of it like another legislative branch, thinking that you should stack it with people who agree with you in an effort to change the way the court works. You know what happened when FDR tried that? The legislature slapped him, and they capped it at 9 justices. Now, you would seek to do the same thing with your agenda. Shame on you, sir. And shame on any other politician who seeks to do the same thing. The court is not there for you to tinker with and shape and mold like a piece of clay. The court is there to serve as a bastion of truth and justice, and you, sir, diminish that purpose with your political, with your attempts to engage politics into the court. So, again, in conclusion, this is a realization that's been building for quite some time. I have learned a lot in the last 4 months since I started reading more books, primarily about economics and politics. And until somebody can present me with a point of view, or a written, authored point of view, that counteracts the things I've already read, because so far I haven't been able to find any that speak to these issues, speak to issues of Keynesian economics, to speak to issues of justice studies. This is the position I will take. Now, sure, I haven't read enough, but I am intent on reading more. So, again, anyone out there who has a conservative viewpoint to give, I will consider it deeply, as I am, again, in transition on my politics. This is the result of it so far, but I'm open to more from the other side if they have anything. So, all right, moving on to the next segment. Stay tuned. All right, YouTube, thanks for staying tuned. I know the last segment was pretty crazy and it was fairly intense, so I'm going to move to something a little more subjective and something that can be reasoned either way, from either position. So let's take a look at economic systems as a whole. Now, many people judge economic systems like capitalism, socialism, both political ideologies and economic systems together. Now, let's start by defining each system, because those are the two I want to focus on primarily. Socialism is simply this. It is the means, or it is an economic system where the government controls the means of production for a good or service. So what that means is, instead of a market, which is engaged in competition, engaged in, whatever, there's private firms, private ownership. Instead of that, we have the government providing the means of production of goods and services. So instead of having the choice between Kmart and Walmart, you have whatever state retail store exists. Now, some of you are going, well, that's Soviet Russia, isn't it? It's like, no. No. Economic systems cannot be both moral and or immoral, as morals are applied to a nation dependent on its culture. So what we view as evil as a culture is not what another country may view as evil in that culture. So here's what I mean by that. Meaning that we cannot take the values of our culture and judge another culture by it. If a nation desires to have a single entity in the market, such as the government, that is their choice as a nation. That is not for us to judge that nation. We can see the flaws in their system and we can point them out, but we can't judge their morality, as again, economic systems are neither moral or immoral. So, where I'm going with this is this. So, anyway, socialism is where the public controls the means of production. I also did say the government, but usually the two are interchanged in this particular idea. Now, let's look at capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is simply this. It is a market system in which individuals own goods and services, and also they produce and market and use money to further progress in society. So, for example, in our society, we embrace a kind of a hybrided system of capitalism. We have some socialist persuasions, we have some capitalist persuasions, and I would argue they're pretty even on both ends. We have a public network of systems and services. We have a private network of products and services. So, what that means is that, well, here's where I'm going with this. Socialism cannot be viewed as evil because, in itself, it is an economic system. Just capitalism equally cannot be viewed as good or evil. In any government system, any economic system, the evil or good that it does is dependent on the human beings in charge of it. So, let's take Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I of the British Empire is revered in British history as the most amazing ruler in that nation's history. And it has a long history. We're talking it has kings and queens dating back to at least the 900s, if not further. And of those monarchs, she is viewed as one of the most important figures in British history. She brought a golden age to England. And she is credited with being one of the wisest and sharpest rulers ever to rule. And this was in a day and age when women were looked down upon as rulers. They were not respected as rulers. And she, in her cunning and her strength, was able to lead the British Empire into one of its most prosperous ages in all of history. So, now, here's where I'm going with this. At the time, Great Britain was ruled by a monarchy. It did have a parliament as well, as the parliament was established in the 1400s somewhere, if not earlier, maybe even the 1300s. But where I'm going with this is that a ruler or a system of government can work depending on who is the head of it. Now, dare I say that maybe the USSR could have functioned? Possibly. It could have functioned had they not had psychotic rulers like Lenin, Stalin, and further. Stalin being probably the worst of the three big ones, Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin. Stalin was psychotic. There's no question about that. He killed 30 million of his own people, believing them all traitors. So, could the United Soviet Socialist Republic actually have functioned? Yes, it could have, had it had moral leadership, had it had good leaders diverting resources properly. So, what I pictured when I was discussing socialism with a friend of mine, I simply pictured this, is that the state owns all the means of production, all the means of distribution, and when you go to the store, you go to a state store. You buy and sell. Every employee is a government employee. Everyone pays into the system through their wages and through their earnings. And the state simply is the owner and administrator of said services. Now, if we look at that from a cold hard stare, theoretically it could work very well. It'd be no different than going to Walmart versus Kmart. You just go to a single person instead of a competitor. There is no alternative. Again, there's weaknesses and strengths of the system. The weakness is obviously being the lack of competition in the market, so quality control could suffer horribly if there's no accountability in the market to improve its goods and services. And it also puts all the eggs in a single basket. So those are the weaknesses of a socialist system where the government controls all of the means of production. No, I won't argue with that. What's the strength is everyone has access to resources more availably. If you need a store in your town, the government will build a store in your town. If you need technology, the government researches that technology based on demand. So again, we see market principles at work in a socialist society. The only difference is there's only one producer and one supplier. The government. That's it. That's the only difference. Capitalism is pretty much the same way. I mean, the strengths of capitalism being the strive for efficiency. Capitalism is viewed as one of the more efficient economic systems because of the markets allocating goods and resources depending on supply and demand. So, if one group demands this, the supplies are routed to that demand to take advantage of the opportunity in the sale. So, and with capitalism, we also have stronger competition in the market. So, if one group does this product poorly, another group may step up and improve its quality to basically overcome its competitor. It's kind of the difference between made in America and made in China. Chinese goods are viewed as a little bit on the lower quality end. Made in America products tend to be pretty good. And so when we look at examples of that sort, people weigh cheap versus good. Cheap, you can buy more of it, replace it faster and easier if it does break. Versus quality, a lot of upfront money, but there's usually a very strong guarantee of it surviving for the long term. So anyway, but my point is that government systems can be viewed as moral or immoral depending on how they function, who's leading them. Okay, let me try that again. Government systems can be viewed as efficient or inefficient. They can, people who lead these systems are good and evil, not the system themselves. And that's something to remember when you look at government policy, when you look at the market. The market itself works just as socialism could work, just as communism could work, just as the monarchy could work. Any of these systems can theoretically work. It's who we put in charge of these systems that determines whether or not it'll be remembered as a prosperous system or a failed system. So, anyway, that's my my end point for tonight. Please leave comments. Please like. Please share. Please spread. If you have questions, please leave them in my comment box, or you can send them as a message to me personally. I will respond. It's been a pleasure, everyone. You all have a great night. Sleep well.